we'll talk about record keeping notifications. Now, in terms of housekeeping for tonight, again, a little bit of content to get through. May not be as heavy as the previous week, but the session is recorded. Feel free to, obviously, this one will come out again at about 8 o'clock tonight. Feel free to share that on. Again, this is our second last session. So again, my friends, thank you again for joining me today in session 4. Let's kick off now and talk about specifically how CCS is paid. Let's move on. In terms of what we'll cover, when are CCS payments made, the liability for payments. I mean, that's who pays who's liable to pay the gap fee. What is a third-party payment? You know, again, we'll talk about the organizations or the states and state governments that are applicable to pay third-party payments. Statements of entitlement, reconciliation, and any overpayments and debt. Now, that's specifically related to you as a provider and what needs to happen there and how it can be incurred. Any questions, please pop them into the chat. I will do my best to, again, answer them as best I can. I do have someone administering the chat. If we can't actually answer the question on the night, guys, we will get that back out to you as soon as we can with a response. So let's kick off. In terms of when are CCS payments made? Now, this chart here, all I want you to do is probably just focus on the left-hand side here, probably more specifically these boxes here. Okay, now, if you're using software already, this is you already do this process anyway, so there's nothing specific that you need to know here. It automatically happens. But basically, guys, where it starts is now there's, again, as we've talked through this process, there are 3 parties, I guess, to CCS, and that's the provider, Centrelink, and the family itself. Okay, now I'm going to go through the various steps of what happens, but there's only 3 steps to how CCS gets paid. How CCS gets paid, and we're only going to talk about maybe this side of the equation here. And it in terms of very simpleness, it starts with the provider submitting sessions each week. Centrelink, or the Department of Human Services, then processes it, and then the provider, you receive the payment, and then you add that to the accounts of families as you go along, right? In terms of when you invoice families, whether it's fortnightly or weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, possibly termly. But that's kind of how it works, right? It all starts with the session of care being submitted to CCS. Now let's just jump in a little bit deeper into those steps. So step 1, the provider submits session reports. Now, payments will be processed at 9 a.m. each Monday morning for sessions of care that occurred in the previous week and which have been reported before 9 p.m. on the Sunday evening. Okay, so get to the end of this week, you will submit sessions for this week. Okay, get to the end of Sunday, anything that you've submitted between Friday night and Sunday afternoon or Sunday 9 p.m. will be processed Sunday night, and you receive a payments report come Monday morning by about 9 a.m. the next morning. Okay, that's what technically happens. Now, there is an ability to submit sessions ahead of time. So if it got to, say, today, even say Tuesday or tomorrow, and you wanted to submit sessions from Monday through to Wednesday, you can do it. But for real practical reasons, I probably suggest that you don't. The reason I do suggest that is changes can happen between, even though Monday through Wednesday has already gone, you may need to go back and adjust sign in and sign out times. But if you're fairly confident, yeah, you can submit them. But we generally don't recommend it. We kind of just recommend get to the end of the week, say by Friday, make any adjustments you need to, and then submit it in one go. But you can do it. We just don't recommend it. Okay. Now, if a session report is varied or changed, you've got up until 28 days after the start of the week to report those changes. Okay, so payment adjustments will be then processed and paid when the variation is submitted. What I mean there, guys, is that if, for say last week on a Wednesday, you had to adjust the sign in and sign out time of a child, or they didn't attend, or you reduced the fee, you can go back and adjust what they call submit a variation or and make an update to a session of care. So you've got 28 days to do that. Now, again, for real practical reasons, you can go beyond 28 days, but I can't guarantee. I'm going specifically by what the rules say here. If you go beyond 28 days, we always suggest that the system will always ask you to put in a reason of why you're making a variation or a change. What happens with that, if you made this change, say today, that gets then processed on the same day, okay? It gets processed overnight, and then you'll see that change in the CCS the next business morning. So if you made it on, say, Friday night, that won't reflect until Monday morning. If you made it on a change to a session report on a Thursday, that gets reflected the next day on the Friday, okay? So that's how it kind of works. So if you need to make any variations, just try to do it within the 28 days if you want to abide by the family assistance law. Step two. Step two is Centrelink receives the session reports and processes the CCS payment. So CCS gets processed if you're submitting it weekly at the end on this by Friday, and gets processed on Sunday. You get a payments report on the following Monday. If you've made a variation, as I just said, to a session in the past, say in the previous weeks, that gets processed overnight and that appears in your payments the next day. So the next business day for that one. Now, once a session report has been processed, CCS payments will be made directly to you as the provider into your bank account. Payment advice will be issued and a determination of entitlement calculations and notifications of payment will be made available through your software or your PEP. Now, you do get a letter every week confirming the amount of CCS that you receive. Okay, so just if you're in owner, just check your messages and correspondences. You actually get a letter in there that outlines how much you receive. Now, it is possible for payment amounts to be in terms of a negative value as well. This means that the government has clawed back CCS payments. Now, there's a few reasons of why you might see, or I guess what you hear is called negative CCS or a retraction. Now, excuse me. Now, these reasons could be due to like variances in submissions. As I said to you, you may have adjusted, a child may have attended a 10-hour session last week, but you've adjusted it to be a 12-hour session. And the amount of CCS, they may have gone over their hours, the amount of CCS was overpaid, and then CCS might take that any excess CCS back. If a child's been seized, CCS will be clawed back if a child is absent on their last day. Change in parent entitlements, initially over or underpayment as well. Again, when family circumstances change, like if they've changed jobs, or if they've changed, their income has changed, or the family dynamics actually changed itself in terms of the primary carer, entitlements may have changed. If it's been overestimated or it's been overpaid or underpaid, there is an adjustment that can occur as well. Okay, so just for the purposes of this, so changes in parent entitlements can also trigger a CCS clawback. Step 3, providers receive payment and payment advice. So the 3 steps are fairly simple, right, guys? So you submit a session report, CCS gets processed overnight by the Department of Education or Centrelink, and you receive a payment typically on the next day. But if you're doing it on a Friday, you'll get it on the Monday, is when typically when it all occurs. Now, to ensure that you as the provider receives all the CCS payments on behalf of your family, the current provider, you would have had to submit ensure that you've had all your enrollments, your bank account's correct, and all your sessions are submitted, okay? That's just to ensure that you receive your CCS payments every week. Now, when a session report has been processed and a determination of entitlement made, the provider will receive notification of the CCS payments. That's just me telling you that you will receive a letter when the payments have been made. Now, the payment advice that you receive will be sent at the same time as the payment is dispatched and will indicate the following: calculation and determination of entitlements, offsets, amounts. Offsets is the key one. They're amounts taken as payments towards a debt. Now, we're going to talk about CCS debt specifically pertaining to you as a provider in the last part of tonight's session. But if you've got a CCS debt as a provider, sometimes they withhold CCS payments from you in order before that debt is repaid. If in that entitlement notification, you'll also receive an indication of the total payments to be made to you. And any also payments made directly to the individual, back to the parent specifically as well. Okay. Now, on that note, where care is provided before the parent has had their eligibility and entitlement assessed, any backdated CCS amounts are paid directly to the parent once Centrelink confirms their eligibility. Okay, so if I was a family and I started at your service last week and I didn't have any of my entitlements approved yet, it comes and you've gone and you've submitted sessions. You've submitted sessions for me. Technically, last week I'm not eligible for CCS at this stage. Come this week, I've gone through and everything's been approved on by CCS. They've backdated it. Typically, what happens, what should happen, is any of those CCS back payments are back paid to me directly as the individual. Because the general assumption is that you as the service or the provider have charged me full fee for last week. Okay, and then because I was charged full fee, CCS kind of just assume that because I paid full fee, the CCS just comes directly to me. Okay, so that's typically how CCS back payments kind of work in that scenario. So that's only applicable where I've started or a parent or a family has started with your service before they're actually eligible to receive CCS. Hope that makes sense. So coming back from this chart here, we've boiled it down to 3 steps. Submit your session reports, it gets processed overnight, and you receive a payment advice in the next day if it's eligible for CCS. Typically think about it like I've submitted on a Friday night, that gets processed on Sunday. Any changes you want to make between Friday night and Sunday 9 p.m, you can. It'll get processed between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. the next morning. You receive a payments report on the Monday. Now, liabilities for payment. So it's a very technical term, but just maybe think about it like this. Who is due to pay the gap fee? Okay, so we're going to talk about third-party payments in a second as well, but families are responsible for paying the gap fee amount. Okay, so families who receive CCS are responsible and should make a co-contribution to their childcare fees. That is the gap fee. Now, usually if a provider offers a family discount, that is a charge a family less than their usual rate for a session of care, the provider must report the discounted fee in the session report. Okay, there are exceptions to this, and we'll talk about those exceptions in a moment. But if your standard fee is $100 and you've said, hey, Fong, your child attends full-time, we're going to do your rate at $80, which is $20 off the standard daily fee, what you're required by family assistance law is to submit my session at $80 rather than at the full fee of $100. Okay, so that's very clear in terms of the guidelines that CCS want you to follow there. Now, the only exception to this, and this came in, I think, January 2022, is that providers can offer a discount to employees with children enrolled at one of their services and report the full fee. So if I was a staff member at your service, and your daily fee is $100 and you've done a staff discount of 20% off, you only charge me $80, but you can report the full fee to CCS, the full $100, and then CCS is worked off the actual total of $100, not the $80 that you've charged me. That's only applicable for staff that work at your center. Now, that came in January 2022, and that obviously continues. Now, the only thing to consider there, guys, is that the staff members must pay at least 5% of the gap. So you can do a discount of up to, say, I don't know, 90% if you wanted to, but they have to pay at least 5% of the CCS gap fee. Okay. Now, in terms of who can be offered, the discount can be offered to employees who are employed, contracted, or engaged as an educator or early childhood teacher. They can also be offered to those educators or teachers are working at a center-based daycare or OSH service. And the last criteria there, guys, is have a child enrolled in an early childhood education center where they work or is owned by their provider. Okay, so just be employed there at an OSH service or an early education service and have one of your children enrolled there. That's the only criteria that you have to meet in order for staff discounts to be applicable. Okay, so just recapping that one, families are obligated to pay a gap fee. If there's a discount and it's not specifically a staff member, you need to report the reduced fee to CCS. If it's a staff member, you can report the full fee. But again, there's 3 criteria that they would have to meet in order to be eligible for that. What's a third-party payment? So look, let's split this up into 2. Okay, we're going to talk about, say, third parties such as employers or charities generally can't pay gap fees except in very, very exceptional circumstances. Now, where a third party pays part of a family session of care, the provider must reduce the fee report accordingly to ensure the family CCS and their co-contributions are calculated based on the amount that the parent is actually liable to pay for their session of care. Now, very similar to discounts. So, for example, if you had a third-party arrangement and it's not a state or territory government, if you had a third party on behalf of a family paying part of their fee, so let's say it's $100 your daily fee, and you had a third party, maybe it's your employer, the family's employer, and they said, yeah, we're going to contribute $30 to this. Technically, what happens is that the CCS report, what you need to submit to CCS is this. And so your daily fee is $100 and the third party says, yes, I'll pay $30 to that. Technically, what you meant to do is submit to CCS the $70. CCS is calculated based on that $70 and then the parent pays the remaining gap. Okay. Now, the only exception to this is when you receive a contribution by a state or a government. Now, in very simple terms, what we're talking about there, guys, if you're in New South Wales, it's your New South Wales Start Strong. You've got, or if you're in Queensland, it's Queensland Kinder Funding, and then Victoria, you've got your Kinder Funding as well. Okay, so contributions towards fees from state and territory governments, so again, just think about those programs that are run in your state, can contribute to the payment of the gap fee in part or in full. Such payments are made to the provider to reduce the childcare fee liabilities of disadvantaged and vulnerable families, and they are deducted from the gap fee. So the way that works, and as you see in these programs, so let's use Start Strong as an example. If my weekly fee for my child is say $200, I get 50% CCS, I get $100, or take off the withholding. Let's say I've got a gap fee of $95. If I'm eligible for Start Strong or Queensland funding, of that $95, I might get another $40 off per week. I'm only then due to pay $45 at the end of that week. Okay. So in terms of that's only applicable when it's a contribution made by a state or a territory government under one of those programs. Okay. So what happens if, for example, a grandparent is paying the gap fee, but the parent is claiming CCS? Look, it's a bit of a gray area, to be honest with you. Ultimately, it's still the family that's making that contribution to CCS. When we talk about third parties, we're more talking about like specific agencies that are paying those fees. So sometimes it might be a different department. Yeah, that's right. What if it's Anglicare, pay the full fee? Then technically, guys, what you need to do sorry. So let me answer the first question. A grandparent is fine from my understanding, because the grandparent just receives the gap fee to pay on behalf of the parent. So I don't understand in terms of the personal arrangement there, but the family is eligible for CCS. Grandma or the grandparent makes the payment of the gap. That I don't see any issue there. If it's Anglicare, typically if it's Anglicare or a specific body, technically you're meant to issue the invoice to Anglicare, and they pay that on behalf of the family. There's no Anglicare is not eligible for CCS. So typically what you would be doing is you'd be invoicing the full fee to Anglicare for that child, and that's how you get paid for those fees. You can't expect to receive CCS for that one. Hopefully that answers some of the questions that have come through via the chat. Statements of entitlement. So statements of entitlements are issued to the families to ensure that families have a clear understanding of the fees they have been charged, what those fees have been charged for, and how their CCS has offset those charges. Okay. So it's a fortnightly statement to families from providers, outlining the details of the sessions of care provided. It can include the child's actual in and out time, the CCS amount, and the resulting fee reduction amounts. So effectively the gap fee. Okay. So now the provider will need to use the information about entitlements and payments for each child received in their payment advice. Again, a lot of this stuff is done through your software already. There should be a functionality, and I haven't seen a CCS provider, software provider, that doesn't actually have this as part of a standard feature. But you've got to include certain details in your statement of entitlements. Now, in addition to the fortnightly statements, parents or eligible individuals will receive access to information through their Centrelink online account and receive periodic notifications. So there's two places that parents can, I guess, get this information. So through your software provider, you can issue statements of entitlements, and that's one way to see what you've been paid. The other way parents can see what they've been paid and the details of these payments is if they log into their MyGov and just check payments. So they've got to go into MyGov, go to Centrelink, and then there's a little tab that says payments, and it actually outlines everything in terms of what they've received from Centrelink as a benefit. Hopefully that makes sense. Now there is, on the following table, on the following slide, I've got a list of all the things that need to be included in the statement of entitlements. We won't go through them in specifics, but the statement itself needs to obviously include the name of the individual, the name of the child, the date of the issue. It's got to have the service details, so the name of the service. It's got to outline the sessions of care. It's got to outline the fees. It's got to outline any reduction amounts or fee reduction amounts. It includes discounts and things like that. And then it's also got to include the actual attendance time. Okay. So I wouldn't, if you guys really want to write this down, you can, but I'd suggest, again, these slides are available. You can watch the re-recording and just pause it on that if you like. But if you're using software, this is not something you specifically have to worry about, because the standard feature should include all this stuff already for you that you can actually issue out to parents. So let's talk reconciliation. Now, when I talk about reconciliation, maybe think about this from the parent side, because there is nothing specifically that you can do here. Now, we will talk about where you're involved in the next slide, where around any overpayments and CCS debt, but reconciliation as it pertains to this is this. Okay, so reconciliation is also referred to as income review or balancing payments. Now, for CCS purposes, to meet reconciliation conditions, individuals or their partners, you can do so by doing this: lodging a tax return, or submitting an advice to Centrelink and the ATO that they are not required to lodge a tax return. Remember, in terms of when we talked about eligibility, entitlements, The way that those things are determined, specifically entitlements, and we talked about this in week 1, it's based on an estimate of your family income. Okay. So Centrelink or the department work out what level of entitlement to give you based on, again, remember we talked about activity. That's how many hours that you received in terms of subsidized care across a fortnight, and income, which then drives the percentage. Okay. Now, the entitlement percentage is determined based on, I guess, estimated income. But if you're lodging a tax return, that's the income that they use. Now, at the end of each financial year, the total entitlements and CCS payments for each child will be reconciled against the family's actual adjusted taxable income for the year. So as I said to you, when you get CCS at the beginning of the year, it's based on an estimate from the previous income from the previous year. If it comes to the end of this financial year and you've submitted another tax return, they said, okay, cool. Your income for this year was actually higher or was it lower? If it was higher, families will probably incur a CCS debt. You know, this is where we start to talk about 5% withholding and things like that, and how that can reduce families' CCS debt at the end of the year. That's what that's for. But remember, CCS entitlements are based on an estimate. Now, the reverse can also happen as well. If the declared income for that financial year is a lot lower than, say, the previous year, then what happens is families get paid back all that, anything that was withheld, or if they were, that's the first thing, but then CCS then adjust it and then give you a lump sum back to the parents as well. Okay, so two things can happen when you go through and you confirm your income. Now, in terms of the process itself, now reconciliation occurs between the individual and Centrelink. You guys are not involved as providers or educators in this case. Now, specifically for providers, the only thing that you should be aware is that CCS payments may change for those families. And this typically does happen around the, say, July, August period, which is when balancing usually occurs as a process. So again, the only thing to be aware of is that once balancing occurs or income reviews occur, CCS payments can be different from what they've been in the past. The only thing that you as providers need to be aware of is that they can be different, and families will typically ask you, why is my CCS different? Okay. Now, there are 2 deadlines, and we generally remind everyone, and Centrelink also does the same. There are 2 deadlines to submitting income, your income review or your balancing. Now, the first deadline by which reconciliation conditions must be met by individuals is 1 year after the end of the financial year in which CCS is paid. Now, that is from 1 July of the following year. Okay. So the important part about that is, think about it this way. They use last year's income to determine what CCS you get this year. At the end of that year, you submit a new tax return. They then use that new income to predict what your entitlements are for the next year. Okay, so you have parents or families have 1 year in order to update their income. So that's the first deadline. Now, the implication of that, if you don't meet the first deadline, okay, so if your income that you haven't reported back with CCS is greater than 1 year old, payments can be suspended. Okay, so they would stop paying you CCS. So it's very important that when balancing starts to occur, you advise your family CCS can be suspended if you don't. The second one is probably the second deadline. Once your income hasn't been reported for more than 2 years or at 2 years onwards, the implication is that you lose CCS eligibility and it's not going to be paid back. It's not back paid. When you lose eligibility for CCS as a family, you actually have to go through the entire enrollment process or the eligibility process with CCS again, so that they can reinstate your entitlements. And that means you got to go through the whole, you have to go through income test, you have to go through the activity test, you have to provide updated immunization certificates. It's like starting fresh again. The key one there is, despite the fact that you might be eligible, but because you haven't submitted your your income for at least 2 years, CSS will stop and they don't actually have to back pay you. That's the implication for parents. Hopefully that makes sense. So just to sum that up, guys, reconciliation as it pertains to services is more specifically for families. They just need to report their income at the end of each financial year by lodging a tax return. If they don't have, I guess, income, or they don't really need to submit a tax return, you just have to advise Centrelink of that. And you might just have to provide or families have to provide a notification to Centrelink. There's nothing you can specifically do other than be aware that balancing can occur and can affect payments made by CCS, or in worst case scenario, they can just stop them altogether and that won't be back paid. Overpayments and debt. This one does specifically pertain to you as a provider. Now, the diagram that you see there shows the steps for when debt is incurred by a provider and how the amount is recovered. Now, in very simple terms, a childcare debt is typically any amount of CCS paid that is greater than the entitlement for a session of care. Okay, so I guess in layman's terms, if you've been paid more than what you should have received, it's an overpayment. So I know it kind of goes without saying, but things can happen, and I'll talk through a couple of the various reasons of how you can, as a provider, incur an overpayment or a CCS debt. Now, in very where the debt is small, so I don't actually have this definition of what a small debt is, but if the debt is small, they'll just offset any overpayments or CCS debt that they determine that they've overpaid you. It'll be offset by future CCS payments. So if you were due to say every week you're due to receive let's say you're due to receive 15,000 each week from CCS, before your debt is you may not receive all 15,000. They might hold on to say $2,000 until your full debt's been repaid. So instead of receiving back 15,000, you might only receive 13,000, 2,000's contributed back to you, any overpayment or debt. Now, in larger cases, so debts can be offset against payments made through CCS, or you can have an option to pay off the debt in full. Pay it via installments if you've pre-arranged that with the Department of Education. If you want to, you can challenge the debt itself. So it either goes through legal proceedings. Ultimately, the other way that I guess CCS debt or overpayments of CCS can be retrieved back is through a garnishee order as well. Okay. So in very basic terms, if you've been paid more CCS than what your submitted sessions are, then the Department of Education, Centrelink, they do a reconciliation. They say, hey, we've paid you way too much. We need to recoup some of that back. Now, in terms of the circumstances where a provider may incur debt, okay, now these are the four various reasons, I guess. A provider fails to pass on CCS payments to the individual and does not remit them back to the Department of Education within the required time frame. So it's really strange to me that is why this would occur. Like, you submit a session for a child, CCS comes back, you do then have to bill for your gap fee. That one's strange to me, but it can occur is when you receive CCS. It can happen in certain scenarios. You submitted a session, CS has been received. You don't want to charge that family, so you delete sessions and you delete the attendance, and that means you've received CCS, but you're not charging the family for the gap. Those things can happen. So just be mindful that Centrelink do, or the Department of Education do, go through these processes and reconcile what payments you should have received. That probably leads on to my second point. A provider reports care that did not occur. So again, that probably borders on the fraudulent part. you're submitting sessions for something that didn't occur. An individual is overpaid CCS due to a false or misleading statement of the provider or due to the provider's non-compliance with family assistance law. Again, we're probably talking about more specifically the avenues of potentially creating a bit of fraud in terms of claiming CCS when you're actually not applicable for it. A provider's approval or approved service is cancelled or suspended after it received payments during any period following the suspension or cancellation. So I want to believe that these kind of things kind of happen in rare cases, and sometimes it can happen by mistake and you've made adjustments to sessions or something like that where it's innocent. But if you look at the last three reasons, you pretty much want to be able to cheat CCS if you're going to encourage it. There's probably some kind of something. The word's not, I don't want to say the word sinister, but there's probably a practice there that, you might be submitting CCS for non-care related matters or something like that. But that's how an overpayment or debt can occur. Now, if you do receive CCS and you're unable to pass it on to that family, maybe in this particular scenario, the family's has left your service and you can't actually track them down, whatever the case might be. Technically, that must be paid back to the government within 14 days. Okay. Now, if a provider receives a debt recovery notice and fails to comply or terminates a repayment arrangement, interest may be charged on any outstanding debt after 28 days. Okay. So the simple take out of that one, guys, is that after 28 days, if the debt's not been repaid, they can start charging you interest. Now, if a provider closes during the debt recovery period, a debt notice will be issued for outstanding debt. Okay. So CCS debt can occur. Just to sum that one up, you can, if the debt is small, it can be offset against future payments. You have the option of paying it out in full, paying it out by installments. If that doesn't work, then you can go down through legal proceedings. Worst case scenario is if you don't come to an agreement, the department can put a garnishee notice, submit a garnishee notice, which means they kind of just go into your bank and just take any funds that are owed to them. My friends, it's a bit of an early one tonight, so the content was a little bit light on, but in terms of, let's just recap. So payments are made to providers typically 9 a.m. on a Monday following session reports submissions. So submit it at the end of this week. If you submit it on Friday, it all gets processed Sunday 9 p.m. between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. on Monday. You receive a payment report or a notice from Monday 9 a.m. In terms of payments can be made directly to families if they receive care before getting the entitlements assessed. So again, the scenario I used there was if I attended your service last week and I didn't have any entitlements approved at that stage, any back paid CCS can be back paid directly to the family. Families are liable for the gap fee payments. Now, what we touched on there is around third-party payments. So again, if it's say Anglicare or another body, technically Anglicare as a service cannot receive CCS, so you need to bill them the full fee. If it's a grandparent, I don't see why not that they can't pay the gap fee themselves with CCS attached to it. If it's a state-based funding like kindy funding, Start Strong, it can go full fee, CCS, what it would be the gap fee, less any Start Strong or kindy funding, and then the revised gap fee for families to pay. So, okay, that only pertains to state and territory government programs. Families need to lodge a tax return or a notice to Centrelink to be assessed for CCS entitlements. Again, the two key things there. You've got 1 year after the end of the financial year to submit it, otherwise payments are suspended. If it lapses by 2 years, then CCS can be just cancelled altogether. Parents have to go through the the re-eligibility process again, or the application again. A third-party payment is a contribution to childcare fees by someone other than the individual or CCS. A statement of entitlement is used for families to understand their childcare fees. So again, that's a fortnightly report that breaks down what the fees were, how many days they've attended, what CCS was provided, any kind of discounts. Families are entitled to see that. The other way to see all those details as well is for families to log into MyGov, into Centrelink, and just check out their payments, the payments terminal, which that breaks that down as well. If excess CCS is paid to a provider, it will typically be offset by future payments if the debt is small. Only if the debt is small. If it's larger, then you'll receive a payment notice and they'll provide you the payment details of what you need to do in order to repay that debt. Kathy, you said referred debt collection agency. That's probably more pertaining to the family. The family. So if you've got a large debt that is related to a family, then yeah, you can put that through debt collection. The debt we specifically talked about tonight, it was any overpayments of CCS that you may have received as a provider. Just understand that the department do reconciliations and audits, and if they think they've overpaid you, then they will retract it back somehow. Okay. My friends, thank you for sticking with me throughout this process. If you've been through the last 4 sessions, we do have a session next week, and that's just to cover record keeping and notifications. Thank you so much. This recording will be available at 8 o'clock tonight. Please let us know if we've missed anything. Also, feel free to provide feedback. I think most of you have my email now as well. If you want to talk CCS, happy to provide me any feedback. If the content can get any better, if we can do this any other way, I thank you for your support. Thank you again for giving up your Tuesday evening to spend with me just to talk CCS. Hopefully I'll see you back here next week. Hopefully you found at least the first 4 weeks of the bootcamp insightful, or you've learned something out of it. Other than that, my friends, thank you so much again for joining me tonight. I'll see you again next week. Thanks, guys.